Welcome to the webinar. We are just waiting for people to join and we'll start very soon. Good afternoon, everyone. We are about to start our webinar. We're just going to give some more minutes so people can join, and we should start very soon. Just waiting one more minute to start the webinar. People are now joining and we should start very, very soon. And we are live. Very good afternoon. We are about to start our afternoon event. Please welcome and thanks for joining our integrated land use prototype webinar. Just to let you know that the event will be recorded and it's also live streaming on YouTube if you want to access it from there. You are most welcome to make questions. If you want to do that, please use the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen to ask questions throughout the event, and my colleague Justin will be reviewing them and will be answer the questions in the end of the event. Please indicate to whom the question is aimed so we know who to ask. So this project, Integrated Land Use Planning Prototype, is a funded project by Connected Places Catapult and is in support of the creation of new market opportunities for the use of data in planning and land use to achieve net zero. This prototype draws on assorted land use planning data and carbon emissions related data to demonstrate the art of the possible in understanding, forecasting, and establishing a greater understanding of the impacts of various interventions in the built environment. Next slide, please. So this work was led by us at Connected Places Catapult, where we had Courtney Newbold as project manager, our director of modeling and appraisal, Paul Bates, Justin Kleiger, digital planning team lead, Yang Dong, data scientist, Boon Se as a strategic transport modeling, Ashlyn Conlon, our insights and service design team leads, and Dan Rogers as our solution architect. And this work was then carried out by the University of Bradford and Sheffield teams, and also by Unboxed. The teams were tasked with building a wireframe prototype tool that explores ways to integrate land use planning processes within achieve net zero carbon emission targets. The first part of the project was led by the University of Bradford, and Dr. Deval will present us their extensive desktop research and outputs, where he will discuss the common issues in planning for net zero, the different data sets, tools, and models identified by the research, and the local authorities interviews outputs. And next we're gonna hear from the Unboxed team, where Graham will tell us about their delivery, agile approach and sprint methodology, and Celia and Hallie will do us a live demo of the prototype. In the end, we will have time for your questions. And I will now pass to Dr. Deval from the University of Bradford, and we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Dhaval Thakur. I'm an associate professor at the University of Bradford. And I'm going to present the work we have done in this project around desktop / horizon scanning research. This research was also done with Dr. Sudeep Majumdar from University of Sheffield. Next slide, please. So this is the outline of our talk. First, I'll discuss the scope of the horizon scan research, what methodology we had used, some of the common issues we have identified, also emerging themes we have identified, and I'll also point to the research outputs. Thank you. Next slide, please. In terms of the scope was to survey all the existing work in the area of urban planning with a focus on net zero carbon emissions. And in terms of methodology for doing this, it was twofold. The first one was user research methodology by interviewing strategic and operational planning experts and also digital teams from 7 local authorities across England. And you can see on the left-hand side the breakdown of the local authorities interviewed in this user research. In addition to that, we also did qualitative research in finding dataset tools and models, including on World Wide Web, but also looking at academic literature as well. Next slide, please. So starting with common issues we have identified while planning for net zero, I think one of the focal point is data. And what we identified as in the first bullet point is the bit of disparity between different authorities. Some authorities would prefer access to more data, while the other authorities find the amount of large volumes of data which is already available to them overwhelming, and they need more support in dealing with it. Also, I think the access to data and availability of data and the knowledge of that the data sets are available is not always standard across organizations. And often decision makers realize that certain types of data sets are available, or what is the potential of it quite late into the process as well. There is also general concern around data quality, validity, and trustworthiness of data and data sets being used while making planning decisions as well. Next slide, please. So next set of issues are categorized as issues with tools and models. Once again, we identified that there is a very varied level of sort of technological adoption and maturity across different local authorities. Some use simplistic models, and a lot of them use carbon footprint calculators, while others use complex tools such as Scatter, which is a tool which was often mentioned in our discussion as well. And also, when we talk about the complex models, a lot of them primarily use complex models for transport to estimate carbon emissions, but we could not find any examples of through the local authorities that use an integrated approach towards modeling carbon output. So that combines, number of different parameters and aspects together at the same time, such as transport, energy, land use, and so on. Next slide, please. Okay, so we also identified that there are planning dilemmas underneath, some of the decision making and how authorities want to do this. The first one is most of the authorities highlighted the need to regenerate brownfield sites, but there is always dilemma around how do you balance that with the financial and environmental impact of such regeneration. Also, there is a big concern around significant proportion of emissions which comes from existing built environment, and how do you sort of still stick to net zero targets while you're dealing with existing built environment, while new built environment are relatively easier to deal with when you're doing things from the outset. There is also concern regarding how far existing policies, such as building regulations, which is the policy tool which is available to them, could be applied towards achieving net zero targets as well. Also, we identified, as in the last bullet point, there is a bit of inconsistency in terms of how this could be done. So, for example, a planning permission could be rejected based on NO2 contribution of it into potentially increasing NO2 levels, which are already too high in an area, but it could be still resubmitted in few years' time when the NO2 levels go down, and still could be approved at that time. Next slide, please. Okay, so moving on from the issues identified to insights and emerging themes, one of the things which came out was monitoring once a planning development is approved and is developed. The monitoring process is not standardized. Sometimes it's non-existent, but a lot of time it's not standardized. And there are possible solutions which could be for this issue or this problem, and that could be around the standardization of submitting hard data in planning applications, but also including a standard monitoring plan in the planning officer's report as well. And if somebody wants to look at an example of a system like that, the link to this slide is already provided, which points to a plant tech system which is developed by CPC and RTPI. Next slide, please. So another insight is that there is no formal process in integrated planning for net zero, which is often is different for different regions. And obviously the authorities with greater open spaces and green belt have policies which are very different from priorities and policies for authorities with greater built up areas. And most authorities we spoke to had sought more support from the central government in terms of standardized guidelines or frameworks in this area. They see there is a need for that. Next slide, please. The next one is there is a lot of reliance on external parties in terms of doing assessment for the development proposals, but also sometimes in terms of monitoring and validation process as well. And one of the potential problem with involving external parties often lead to is that the reports which are generated by them are generally textual, and the raw data is sort of get lost into PDF files. So again, when it comes to deriving insights from them or looking at historical data, that becomes very, very hard thing to do. And again, there might be the work which is done by CPC around digitally enabled version demonstrator, which focuses on standardized, structured, and machine readable data. Might be something people might be interested in looking at with respect to this problem. Next slide. In terms of final insight, we saw there is a great hunger for knowledge sharing and also peer learning as well. So there was a kind of a common thread across different discussions we had, where I wanted to understand, what other authorities are doing, how they're dealing with these challenges in terms of data and modeling, but also, meeting net zero emission targets. Also around, what are the standard process practices for like planning and policy making. And there is definitely, what we sense is there is a need for sharing spaces and communities of practice where local authorities can share their experiences and reflect on practice in this area. Next slide, please. That's the last slide. So all these insights which we have generated in terms of issues and also some of the potential solutions, but also those insights are there as this output is there as a report. So there is a link which is missing here, but this would be provided after a webinar, I believe, the link to the report. In addition to that, we, as I mentioned from the outset, that we also did a qualitative research which resulted into 113 different data sources in different domains around transportation, land use, net zero, and energy. And the breakdown is given here on the right-hand side on the top figure. And also distribution of these data sources, where they come from, is given into this pie chart as well. And all this is going to be made available as an Excel document, I believe, after the webinar as well. This is me. I think I'll end here, but all these insights which is generated, but also the data sets we identified, has been taken on by the Unbox team, who have developed a prototype to show the art of possible, which includes these insights, but also they have done some user research and identified more data sets. And I'll hand over to Graham from Unbox team to walk us through the process, but also the prototype as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much to the Bradford and Sheffield team. So I'm Graham, a delivery manager for Unboxed. Our team will be presenting the research and prototyping phase that we delivered with the Catapult as part of this project. So I'll be covering the approach we took for the project, and I'll be handing over to my colleagues Ali, who's a designer, and Celia, a developer, who will be demoing the prototype. Next slide, please. So following up from the Bradford's research, we had a series of different questions to answer. What could some of the current difficulties in carbon net zero planning be? What could some of these look like now? And particularly the question we're looking at is, what could this look like in the next 5 years? So if we were to look at the future of carbon net zero planning, what could the art of the possible look like? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Great. So our focus for this phase is to understand, if a tool existed, where would it sit within local authorities, and what teams and individuals would be using it? What sort of data sets would be useful to bring together to create this holistic view that we're looking to get? And what are the current barriers to achieving this? Next slide, please. So to deliver this phase, we applied an Agile methodology. It was aligned with the GDS Government Digital Service Standard. And this was really to ensure that we're putting user needs at the forefront of the project. We were working short sprint cycles, meaning we could quickly respond and adapt to any emerging change throughout the project. So throughout this, we've been able to embed Agile best practice throughout the process and our ways of working for this project phase. Next slide, please. So in terms of our team, we worked as a multidisciplinary team with we had a product owner from the Catapult, and the inbox roles that we provided included design, user research, development, and delivery. And it was really to provide a holistic view in terms of design, but also technical aspects of the project as well. Next slide, please. So we delivered our discovery and prototyping phase across 6 weeks. So we ran it through 3 2-week sprints. And we embedded our Agile meetings throughout and concluded each sprint with a show and tell, meaning we were able to share progress and gather feedback from key stakeholders on the project and really pull that into what we were doing for the next sprint. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, our approach to delivering the phase was through Agile and user-centered methodologies, and this included identifying user needs through primary research. So this included user interviews, one-to-one interviews with individuals, as well as a number of co-design sessions to start working out what is it we're looking at. We're also exploring the technical aspects to understand the technical feasibility of the prototypes that we've been looking at. And then we created a series of early stage prototypes based on the identified user needs from those interviews and co-design sessions. We then tested our prototypes each sprint with users for feedback. So we went back to the people we spoke to and tested with them and new people as well. And we iterated our designs and functionality based on this feedback. So it enabled our team to evolve from lower fidelity prototypes and concepts to higher fidelity prototypes and really validate what the tool needs to do to meet user needs. Next slide, please. So throughout the phase, we spoke to and tested with a wide range of different roles within local authority teams. We spoke from planning officers to transport officers, policy officers, GIS teams, and to climate officers and more. And it was really important that we got kind of a wide holistic view of different types of roles within organizations of how they fit into this tool. So I will now hand over to my colleague Ali, who will be taking you through the prototype itself.
Great, thank you, Graham. Next slide, please. So the focus of the prototype was really on 2 different use cases. So we had one within the built environment and one within changes in land use. So within the built environment, we were really focusing on users of policy officers, and we really wanted to support them with the tools to assess the built environment to create actionable and targeted policy solutions. And then within changes in land use, our main user was really planning officers, and we really saw this tool as a way to negotiate with developers by giving them robust data to ensure that new developments really included carbon reduction interventions. You might ask why we focused on these 2 areas. During our user research, we were speaking with a council, and they were talking about how even if all new developments, like a lot of the energy at the moment is going into ensuring that new developments are carbon net zero. But even if all new developments have every single carbon reduction intervention included, they will still be at the same carbon level as we are today. So we really need to focus not just on new developments to ensure that they are carbon net zero, but also to how we can improve the built environment to include that. So I'm now going to give you a live demo of the prototype. So if we could get access to the screen, great, thank you. So for this prototype, we were really looking at the art of the possible. So what might a tool like this look like if we could be, if we had data on a very granular level, and with this data, how could we support local councils? So for the example, I'm going to be using the local council of Nunnington and Bedworth. So as the council, you'd be able to log on to this screen and see an overview of the data that's specific towards your council. So here I can see how we are as a council moving towards that net zero goal by 2030. I can see the implemented climate policies here in pink, and kind of that stark reality of that we actually won't meet that 2030 target without more implemented policies. You can also see the pledged policies here. So there is a few in place, but it's not going to help us reach that ideal, that purple line. As well as being able to have an overview, we really want to be able to give councils the ability to see how they're performing by sector. So you can click here and see the emissions by sector, and you can see which different sector is the highest contributor towards carbon emissions. So you can see here transport and domestic energy. As well as this, we really wanted to be able to give councils not only the ability to monitor their own progress, but to see how they are working towards the overall target. So look at the UK. So here you can see the UK-wide target and how we're projecting towards that. It was also one thing that came out as was how we could monitor and see the impact of individual policies. So here you can select a policy by type. So for this example, we're going to look at energy, and then you could find a specific policy name. Obviously we'd have more in here, but hypothetically you'd have energy bill 2.5, and we'd be able to select that bill. We can see that it's a pledged climate bill and it's part of the 10-point plan. So we want to see what does the impact that does this new policy have on our overall target. So we can then toggle these new policies on and off, which gives the not only the ability to see how we're moving towards net zero, but also what maybe extra interventions we might need to take if this policy doesn't have the desired effect. So as well as that, I was talking about these two main use cases. So we have one use case which is within the built environment. So here you can see collectively the kilotons of carbon emissions per year in Nuneaton and Bedworth. And this was really to give policy officers the overview of where to target new policy solutions to support net zero. So as you can see, domestic energy is a really high producer of carbon emissions. So I'm going to select onto there as a policy officer. And I really want to evaluate where I should be targeting my new policy solutions. So as you can see here, you've got an overview of the entire area, but I could filter that down even more if I wanted to by ward or by specific building. You can then also filter further through like land use type. Here we have Class C selected, or by sector. So maybe looking at specifically private houses or specifically council-owned buildings, as well as being able to see the specific energy ratings of these buildings. So as we know, buildings with lower energy ratings may be a higher contributors to carbon emissions. So for the purpose, I'm going to keep my my search quite large, and I'm going to see what policy solutions might I be able to implement that will reduce the carbon emissions. So overall on the left here, I can see the current selection that I have, and then also the emissions of that selection. And I can also see what does that mean? So the carbon emissions, so the gas, the electric and other fuels. So if I'm then wanting to improve the energy rating of these buildings, I have that broken down here in terms of intervention. So that might be reducing the amount of gas boilers or increasing maybe the insulation of walls or attics. So for here, I'm going to select and I'm going to reduce the amount of gas boilers. And what it shows me here is the effect that will have. So how many buildings are going to be impacted if I have reduced the amount of gas boilers, but also what's that going to have on the predicted carbon emissions afterwards. So as you can see here, the overall gas for Nuneaton and Bedworth is reduced, but there has been an increase in electricity, obviously, because we've switched from gas boilers to other interventions. But what we also wanted to be able to do is be able to show the policy officer what maybe this kind of impact would have. So you'd be able to toggle that intervention on and off, so you can see here without it and with it. So it really does reduce the overall carbon emissions of Nuneaton and Bedworth by that sector of domestic energy, but also how that intervention is going to impact the overall total carbon emissions. So you can see there toggling the intervention on and off again. But as you can see here, we do get a warning, which is if we are going to reduce all of the gas boilers, we are going to have an increase in demand of electricity. So from that, we can then go on further to look at the impact of increasing the amount of renewable energy. I'm now going to hand over to Celia just to talk through some of the benefits.
Thanks, Ali. I just wanted to remind people that if you have any questions, please click on the question and answer button and put them in there, and we'll answer them at the end of this. So the main benefits that we saw for this section of the prototype would be helping multiple departments within local authorities, say housing, regeneration, climate change teams, to collaborate and understand where the money should be allocated to have the greatest impact to meet their net zero targets within domestic energy. So, you know, should we be putting money into reducing gas boilers, or should we perhaps be investing in heat pump networks? And this tool would help them direct their thoughts in that. This tool also helps give a holistic understanding of housing demographics and would allow councils to tailor their grants and marketing. So if you can see that the houses with a high average income, but there are a lot of Class D energy certificates, we should probably target them because they'll have more spare income, whereas those with lower incomes but a Class F energy certificate won't be able to afford it. So probably not best to target them. It would also be able to provide a robust evidence base and targets to help those policy officers negotiate with the electricity grid, as we just saw there in that example. If we reduce gas boilers, we need more electricity, so some discussion will need to happen around that. And finally, this section of the tool could be scaled to all building types. There we just showed Class C, but we could do this for hospitals and schools and all other types of buildings. So those are the main benefits of that section. I'll hand back over to Ali.
Great, thank you, Celia. So I'm now going to show you the second use case of this tool, which was change in land use. So we really envisioned having this kind of approach being useful within kind of the three sections of planning. So creating supplementary planning documents and really embedding net zero into them at the start. But then also the tool which I'm going to share in a bit more detail is negotiating pre-planning assessments. So really having that negotiation power with developers, as well as having the final section being able to, if we are collecting data like this on a scale, we'll be able to monitor and see where improvements need to be made within policy to ensure that more new developments are including carbon reduction interventions. So for this example, we're going to look at negotiating pre-planning assessments. So we're envisioning in a time in the future where developers will propose their development solutions through a site like this. So as a planning officer, I'll be able to log on and I'll be able to select that pre-planning application. And from this overview, I can then see what they are planning to do with a site. So this is a greenfield site, which is going to be turned into residential. So I can see the proposed area, the boundary of the site, as well as the proposed green infrastructure and proposed housing. And then as a planning officer, I want to assess what they are going to do. I can see how the development score is currently, which is an average. I can see also the proposed developments. So currently they are proposing 600 dwellings with a predicted embodied carbon emission. We can see the operational carbon emission and then also the predicted carbon capture, because there is a section of green infrastructure there as well. And we can see what the overall impact. So obviously there's going to be greater impact during development, but then once the site is up and running. We can also see here on the left how this new development is going to impact the overall local council's carbon emission. So because it is a greenfield site, we know that there is going to be more people and more houses. So maybe we're going to have a higher demand on energy, more need for transport, and also more community infrastructure like hospitals and schools. So what as a planning officer I can do now is I can go on to the proposal and evaluate what they're planning to do to see how I can get the most out of this site and ensure that it is working towards net zero. So I can reduce the amount of houses and I can use a scale to increase the amount of green space and planted trees, which here will increase the amount of predicted carbon capture on the site. We have also used this checklist which another local council was doing, so it's kind of copying best practice, and we really saw this as a way to clearly be quite transparent about what a development is going to propose. So we have like a minimum requirement, and then the amber, which is net zero by 2050, so it's good but not quite good enough, and then that green is really net zero by 2030, which we would be really pushing local developments for. So the example is like on-site renewable energy technology has been included in the development. So we can see here that the developer has proposed that what they are going to implement is PV and EV charging, but we know that that's not quite good enough. So what if we could push the developer to choose electric heat pumps and solar thermal? And we can see then that there is a huge drop in operational carbon, which is going to greatly impact how much the development is going to contribute to carbon emissions. This is just the section that we've prototyped within this section, but we also feel like that you could create other sections within this, for like waste management, water management, or air quality. So I'm now going to pass back over to Celia.
Thanks. So the main use that we saw for this section of the prototype is being able to negotiate with the developers to ensure that the developments meet net zero targets. So, you know, if we ask you to do this, maybe you could do this, and it gives them a robust evidence base so that they feel confident enough to be able to do that, which, and I think we heard in our user research that confidence is lacking at the moment. But other benefits, the tool could receive pre-planning applications from council-owned land and buildings and ensure that their own sites are helping meet those carbon net zero goals. You could also create supplementary planning documents with this and ensure that you're promoting best practices for those using, again, all the evidence. And finally, you could, once this tool had been in use for say a year, you would have a year's worth of data and collected from all those different planning documents, and you'd be able to understand where policies needed to be improved to help meet carbon net zero, perhaps become more strict, or even create new policies to be able to adapt and ask for more from your developers. So that finishes our section and the demo of the prototype. I'm going to hand back over to Nelio.
Thanks, Celia. So now we can go to our questions that Justin is putting together for us to reply. Justin, can you please?
Hi, Nelio, thank you. We've got a couple of really good questions. I think the first one is actually to you, Nelio, from Sue James. She's talking about MHCLG reviewing the responses to the planning white paper consultation. Has this work connected to MHCLG to see how planning reform can help in this respect?
Yeah, thanks. Absolutely. It's a very good question. We are at CPC in our digital planning and standards team. We had a look to the MHCLG white paper that we had a response, and it's available on our website. And so it's a work that we keep doing on our Plan Tech team to try to address the new idea about the white paper, and especially with this prototype, what we're trying also to do is to understand the impact of planning policies to try to achieve net zero in 2030 or 2050. As I think most of people will be aware, there's this goal of the UK government to make net zero by 2050. Some local authorities are trying to achieve that by 2030. And so there's a lot of information. Some councils have more data, some councils have more specialized people, some councils are struggling a little bit. So we are trying with getting all this data together, trying to predict better so we can plan better in the future and try to adapt to new changes.
Thank you, Nelio. I've got a question from Oliver Smith, and this is to the team from Unboxed, so Celia, Graham, and Ali. This tool appears to simply advise on policies for assessing and planning applications towards net zero in a purely reactive way. Oliver asks if it can in any way help to make a much more critical decisions about where development, infrastructure, and etc. should happen in a more proactive way.
I'll pick up that question. That is a really great question. And as we were developing the tool, we realized that there is a lot of possibility that could happen. We also realized that as it was we didn't have a huge amount of time. And as we were kind of peeling back the layers, we realized that you could do a lot of things with this tool. But it really was, there was definitely a challenge, because I think there was kind of a lot of questions that you could answer. So specifically with gas boilers, so if you're reducing the amount of gas boilers, and what is the alternative? There is, we know that there's six or seven different alternatives to switching out from gas boilers. And did we want to have the tool be able to give you that information? But we also know that that's probably we wanted to be able to more show where the next possible solution might be able to go. Sorry, that wasn't very well answered. Maybe Graham or Celia could pick that up.
If not, I'll head on to the next question, which is, apologies if I get your surname wrong, Howard Wapples. I think this is a question, actually a combined question to both Ali and your team, as well as to Deval. The prototype looks really good, and thanks everyone. Some local authorities collect carbon offset payments to be reinvested back into the energy efficiency measures in public buildings. Would this help them to optimize how this money is spent?
Yes, definitely, we think so. Especially if you are looking at council-owned buildings and managed, or well, maybe privately managed. We would envisioning maybe if you could specifically filter by that subsection, and we could use it then as a negotiating tool to ensure that new management companies were pushing the carbon reduction measures within these buildings.
Thank you. I'm going to go to another question from Sue James. This one again is for Unboxed, and it's about biodiversity and environmental net gain. So when it comes to those factors, does the tool ensure that the planning authority has the evidence for what they have now, so that the gain can be assessed?
I think this tool is sort of imagining a more digital future world where there is more monitoring, there are more digital processes, and so that evidence base is there. I mean, obviously, I don't think this tool could be used right now. There just isn't that level of granularity of data as Deval was talking about. So we're kind of imagining that in 5-10 years' time, all the work that everyone's doing to digitize the planning process has happened. It's all great. We're monitoring, we're collecting lots of data, and then that evidence base would be there. And then once the tool had been used, the more evidence would be gathered and collected, and the base would be bigger. But yeah, it's probably a while off at the moment, unfortunately.
Thanks, Celia. This is a quick one. Matthew Blackmore just asked who you can get in touch with if you'd like some more information about this. So if anyone is interested in more information, you can just get in touch with myself or Nelio at the Catapult, and probably the easiest way is via the Plantech, so PLANTECH email at cp.catapult.org.uk. And here's a question from Sean Cleary. It's really interesting looking prototype. In the second use case, does the tool take into account the likely transport behaviours of future residents, based on factors such as proximity to public transport and maybe even local amenities and employment. So again, Celia, Ali, or Graham.
Yeah. Oh, Ali and I jumped on this one.
Shall I start and you finish it? This was something that we really prototyped in one of the earlier versions of this tool, looking at how we could include the transport modelling, and also thinking about proximity to public transport, but we do know that transport modelling is just very complex and it takes a lot of modelling power, and takes a lot of time. So these models normally take about a day to run. So there is maybe the capacity to think about that in the future, but within this current prototype, we didn't include it.
Thank you very much, Ali. And thank you everyone for your really positive feedback. I think Seema Dave just wrote, great tool. And it's really nice to hear like positive words. Does it give an estimation on funding requirements for the proposed changes? I'm guessing again, that's to Unboxed team.
That was another thing that we thought would be possible. The more people start to use this tool, the greater visibility you'll be able to have on cost. But there is just a lot of unknowns at the moment. But hopefully, the more that we start to use tools like this, the more that we'll be able to no longer base it on estimation, but really on like evidence that we've collected in the past. But currently, that isn't possible.
Thanks again, Ali. Did someone else have something they wanted to add? No? I thought I heard another voice. This question is actually to me, so I'll be asking myself a question. It's from Jack Ricketts. So there seem to be some similarities between the tool that we've just seen and some of the other tools, for instance, the one that works on developer viability assessments, and in terms of the way that you negotiate planning processes and planning applications through the use of these tools. Do we see if there's an opportunity for the tools to work together in the future? And the answer is absolutely yes. I think that in an ideal world, the sorts of information and the data that would be feeding into these tools would live in a form of a centralized place or a centrally controlled place where it could pull from one another. And then actually you could build on this information and create a central library. So I think in an ideal world, and hopefully in the not too distant future, but possibly in a couple of years' time, we'd be able to see all these, like a suite of all these tools being used by local authorities across the country and possibly even across the entire United Kingdom. And just following on from that, this is a question from Sue James. I think this might be to Nelio or to Deval. It sounds as if there needs to be some agreed standards that are set at a national level and so that all local authorities follow.
Yeah, absolutely. I can start, and probably Deval, based on the interviews and data research, can also give some input. So I guess, like from this work and from previous works that we did, the standardization and the availability in a digital format of data, it's one of the biggest problems that local authorities face, because there is a lot of data, but a lot of times that data is not ready to use or in a format that people can really explore it. And we also have the problems in relation to the tools and money that local authorities can spend in getting new tools and softwares, and also their internal know-how. So we get like more and more combined authorities trying to get like their data together to get a bit more of what you can from the data that you have available, and try to create outputs. But absolutely try to create more standards. It's important so we all speak the same language. Geospatial Commission is now working especially on the geospatial data to try to bring different data sorts together and make it available so people can use it and understand in terms of the licensing and the data and what it means. So all the users from councils or even like private companies can get better outputs from it. I don't know if Deval, you want to add?
I think I just agree with everything you just said. And I think just to add to data and tools and so on, standardization in those aspects, I think there is a need for standardizing processes as well. So I think, as I mentioned before, that authorities are looking at central government to see, some guidance, if not standardization, but some standardized guidance to come from them, or frameworks to come from them to see how they can manage this process while keeping an eye on net zero emissions. And also, I think that process or the framework needs to take into account the diversity of authorities we have in terms of greater open spaces against greater built-up areas, I think. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. This is a question from Alistair Ford, and I think it might be again to the Unbox team. There is a real need for tools and data to help local authorities identify suitable development sites based on multiple competing demands. So for instance, reducing emission from transport greater than 30% of emissions from which forms effectively greater than 30% of the emissions in most urban areas, or minimizing flood risk, or protecting natural capital, etc. So could this tool help authorities think across these competing demands to assess future development locations?
Again, in one of our previous iterations, we had a bit of the prototype which sort of did that. And we tried to explore it, but it got very complicated very quickly. And again, the shorter time frame meant that we decided to go down this path. But that was definitely one of our initial ideas, and we thought it was a really interesting one, but we couldn't quite fit it in this time, unfortunately.
And stay on the line, Celia, because I've got another one for you, but you've gone away. Oliver asks again to the Unbox team, so this is again to Celia and Ali. As a rider, and for example, how can this tool map impact on available water supplies, the danger of flooding, impact of potential public transport infrastructure, etc.? Celia, Ali?
Sorry, finding the buttons. Yeah, again, I think that's totally possible. We were really interested in how GIS layers could be worked into this as well. Yeah, it's really important to know that kind of stuff. Again, we need to think about all the data that we could have, and maybe with this we could have gone even bigger picture thinking, and that would be really interesting to think about as well. Like the more data, the better, I guess, in this case, and that would really help with that. But again, short timeframes and a further phase of work to think even bigger picture and like work out where the boundaries of this could be would be really interesting and exciting.
Thank you very much, Celia. I'm actually going to pose this question that just came in as you were talking, which is a really good one to all of the members of the presentation so far. So that if you could all come back online, I'd love to hear what you all have to say about this. Kieran Perkins asked, what do you think should happen next, say in terms of starting to grapple with the areas of complexity that have been mentioned so far? It would be really interesting to get everyone's points of view.
The Unbox team came up with some quite specific next phases of the project that we'd like to see. One of them would be conducting a technical alpha phase to build out those areas of the prototype that are particularly complex and just check out the riskiest bits and see how possible it would be, pulling in as much real data as we could be, working out what an MVP might be. So that would be a really exciting idea for us, as well as looking into those complex algorithms that we obviously need to have. So, you know, it's all very well to say, well, if we just reduce gas boilers and then we'll up the electricity need, that's quite simple to say, but obviously the calculations behind that are way more complex, and we at Unboxed are not algorithm experts. So it'd be cool to spend some time looking into those, seeing what's possible, talking to some proper, some more model experts out there and seeing what could be possible with that as well.
Celia, before we jump to anyone else, I just want to clarify MVP is a minimum viable product, because someone asked that in the questions.
Yeah, sorry.
Anyone else they want to jump in?
I can add a bit to that. So because this was a very short frame prototype and development and research, we focus on some use cases that Ali and Celia presented here. But I guess the general idea and what we would like to do next was was getting these initial ideas, try to understand a bit better all the net zero policies, try to understand if they are different from council to council and if people are understanding them, and then try to get that data together. And that's where it comes, where Celia was mentioning the algorithms, is have a bit more of time to understand and to work with the data and the policies and create an output that then can be like an answer in terms of net zero, and also an answer in terms of better planning to build better places.
Ali, did you have any thoughts on that, or Deval?
I think that Celia answered that very well from the Unboxed side. I think there's two things that I think we would need to add would be just understanding how we should be going about collecting data in the future, and understanding the importance of collecting data on a granular level, and then also how we're monitoring policies. So we could have that kind of that projection on that screen to see how we're moving towards net zero, and if the policies that we are implementing have the desired effect, and if they don't, then how can we mitigate that?
Thank you, guys. That was really, really helpful. Sue James asked again, do we need to, I think this is probably a rhetorical question, but it's a nice point that I'd like to leave to linger, is do we need to think bigger picture to avoid intended consequences? I don't know if anyone has the answer to that. I certainly don't, but I think that's the question that we always ask ourselves when we embark on these sorts of projects. I thought I'd just share that one with everyone. And then there's one here. Sorry, I can't pronounce your name. I don't want to make a mess of it. But good prototype, it's related to the question around optimization. It's always about the investment. Is there a plan to include a cost-benefit analysis as part of this work?
I think like a good prototype, and a lot of the work that we do, it's exactly that. It's try to invest some time and experiment, and not exactly fear to fail, but try to build different stages of the research, then getting data together, and then getting like alpha and a beta stage. And that's, I believe, at this stage, we're not exactly understanding the cost analysis. We're more trying to understand how can we build this, and how can this tool be useful for different local authorities. That's why we interviewed a lot of people and tried to work. And the next stage will be exactly that, try to understand the impact in terms of the cost analysis.
100%, Nelio, and stay online, Nelio, because I've got another one for you. This is our final question, again from Sue. Should councils get central support so that they can have the necessary data for the decision-making guidance that the tool could deliver?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest problems that we see when we talk with local authorities, is like the trouble and difficulties that sometimes they have to access to all these different types of information. So if we can get it for them in a better standardized and up-to-date format, so that they can use, or it can be data that is not ready to use already, or data that can be ready to use. So it can be something that can be done internally by their data people or GIS people that can work with this data, or then we have different SMEs and private companies that we also support, that try to get some work ready to do, and so the local authorities can use.
Great, thank you. If there's any further questions, feel free to keep popping them in the Q&A section at the bottom. You can use the button at the bottom. And if you do think of anything, please just drop at the very beginning who the question's to, so I don't have to guess. Just going back to what I mentioned before, in case anyone missed it, if you are interested in being in touch with us about the work that's been done by ourselves together with Unboxed and the team at Bradford, just drop an email, plantech@cp.catapult.org.uk. We'll pick it up and we'll definitely get in touch with you guys there. Unless we get any more questions, I think I'll pass back to Nelio.
Okay, thank you very much, Justin. And I think we answer all the questions.